In this video, we're going to start looking at organizing our objects and entities into layers. Now, currently, we have some terrain, some vegetation, and some ocean, which is really nothing too desperate to deal with. We can go over to our category, and it's easy to turn on or off vegetation, terrain, and even our ocean. So not too big a deal. But we're reaching the point in our level where we're going to start adding a lot more things to it, and it's best if we start to keep those things organized as we go. So to do that, we're going to use the layer function. We're going to come over to the far end here to our layers panel, and as you can see, we have one layer called main, which it defaults to, and all of the extra little bits that we create are going to default into this. So we want it to not do that, and we want to have some way to organize what we're doing. So we're going to come to this first button and add a new layer. Now, this can be anything that you want it to be. You can organize this whatever way works for you. Perhaps you want to organize it by objects or entities. Perhaps you want to organize it by an area. If you have a very large map, maybe you want to work by areas, and in this case, perhaps this little area here we could call Cove, and we can click on this, choose a color, click OK. Now we have a new layer called Cove, and we could put everything that's in this little area here into that. Now, maybe we want to organize by types of things instead over the whole map. This is a small map, so this is the way we're going to do it. So we can get rid of a layer like Cove by simply selecting it and hitting delete layer. And it will tell you whether you have any child layers or any objects in there. We don't. We're going to create another new layer. And in the next video, we're going to get a start with some of the basic particle effects available to us, and we're going to add some falling leaves. So let's call this layer Leaves. And we'll pick a color, and that brown we had seems pretty good. So now we've got our Leaves layer, and when we set up our particle effect, we can assign it to this to make organization a little bit easier. But now let's look at one more thing. If you have a lot of stuff going on in your level, or a very big level, you might easily have a whole list of particles here when you're done. And even if it's in its sub-objects like leaves or particle effects or something like that, you could still have a very long list to go through to find what you're looking for. So what if we organize that down further? Well, that's pretty easy to do. So if we're going to have a particle effects group or layer, let's call this particle effects. Oh, and look at that, I didn't add a color. So we can right click on this and go to settings, or we can select it and go to settings, click on our thing, and particle effects feel very bright green to me. How about you guys? Let's do that. Love it. No, hate it. I lied. Can't even read it. Now I love it. Anyway, so we have our particle effects layer, and maybe we want sub-layers for the different particle effects that we're using. So we can take our leaves, hold down Control after we selected it, and just drag it over particle effects. And now, as you can see, we've made a subfolder for leaves, which we will be able to assign to, and we can do that for fire or specific fog or whatever particle effects we're doing. But that way we can keep a much more organized level going and make it much easier to come back in and figure out what we're doing or where we were at, or more importantly, if you're working with a team, it makes it much easier for someone else to come in and see what you're doing. And one last thing I almost forgot. Our icons at the side here allow us to, in the case of the eye looking thing, either see what's in that layer or turn off what's in that layer. Or in the case of the arrow, much like our selection tool over here, if you're a 3ds Max user, you would recognize it as freeze and unfreeze. So we can turn that off, and that effectively freezes that layer, and we will not be able to select it in here. Turn it back on, and we will be able to select it in here. Now, the other thing you need to know is if you have a really long list here and you want to work globally, if you double click any of these icons anywhere in here, it will take it off the whole list. And likewise, double clicking will bring all of it back. Single clicking on a layer will affect just that layer. So that's how we're going to stay organized with our layers. And in the next video, we'll start creating some stuff to put in these layers.